The Institutes of the Christian Religion, 1541 edition, by Pastor John Calvin. Chapter 6, Justification by Faith and the Merit of Works, page 352 and following. But to avoid tripping up at the very first step, as would happen if we were arguing about something unclear, we must first explain what it means to be justified before God and to be justified by faith or works. That man is justified before God, who in God's judgment is reckoned to be righteous and who is acceptable to his righteousness. For as iniquity is hateful to God, so the sinner cannot find grace in his sight. Thus, wherever there is sin, there we see God's wrath and vengeance. The person then who is justified is not counted a sinner, but is counted righteous, and is thus able to stand before God's judgment seat, where sinners can only stumble and fall. It is as if someone who has been wrongly accused and who has been examined by a judge is absolved and pronounced innocent. He is said to be justified before the law. In the same way, we say that the man is justified before God, who, being removed from the ranks of sinners, has testimony and proof from God that he is righteous. Similarly, we say that a man is justified before God by his works whose life exhibits such purity and holiness that it deserves to be called righteousness in God's sight, or else who, by the uprightness of his works, we can match and satisfy God's judgment. Conversely, he is said to be justified by faith, who, without reference to the righteousness of works, grasps by faith the righteousness of Jesus Christ. When clothed with it, he appears before God's face, not as a sinner, but as righteous. Because most people, however, imagine a righteousness which combines faith and works, let us also demonstrate, before we go any further, that the righteousness of faith differs so much from the righteousness of works that to set up the one is to throw down the other. The apostle declares that he counted, quote, all things as dung in order to win Christ and to be found in him, not having a righteousness of his own which comes from the law, but that which is by faith in Jesus Christ. That is, the righteousness which comes from God by faith. Philippians 3, 8-9. Here we see him comparing opposites and asserting that to obtain the righteousness of Christ, we must abandon our own. Hence, in another place, he writes that this is what caused the Jews' downfall, since, quote, wishing to establish their own righteousness, they did not submit to God's. Romans 10, verse 3. If in establishing our own righteousness we refuse God's to obtain the latter, we must entirely discard the former. He makes the same point again when he says that our boasting is not excluded by the law but by faith, Romans 3:27. It therefore follows that as long as some little drop of righteousness survives in our works, we have something to boast about. But if faith excludes all boasting, the righteousness of faith can in no way coexist with the righteousness of works. And on page 354, he continues to define justification. Now, when Scripture speaks of righteousness by faith, it leads us in a very different direction. It teaches us to look away from our works and to look only to God's mercy and to the perfect holiness of Christ. It lays down this order in justification. To begin with, God accepts the sinner out of pure and free goodness, discerning in him nothing that might move him to mercy except his misery. For he sees him as utterly devoid and empty of good works. He therefore finds within himself the reason for doing good to him. Next, he makes the sinner aware of his goodness, so that, distrusting anything of his own, he entrusts the whole sum of his salvation to the mercy which God shows him. There, then, is the disposition of faith by which man lays hold of his salvation. When, through the teaching of the gospel, he acknowledges that he has been reconciled to God, since through Christ's righteousness he has obtained remission of his sins, and thus is justified. And although he is born again by God's Spirit, he does not rely on the good works which he has done, but is assured that his perpetual righteousness is found only in the righteousness of Christ.